Dana, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you live, and what you have done, throughout your life as a profession.
Okay, I'm Dana Jeske. I presently reside in Western Washington. My first 50 years of life, I was in Eastern Washington. I was a mechanical engineer, worked at a hydroelectric dam, and I was kind of a workaholic. Before I had medical issues, that was my career. I was a professional engineer, and I anticipated to do that for until I died. So that was my goal in life.
Awesome. Awesome. And Dr. Schroeder, tell us about your professional history and where you are.
I am a foot and ankle surgeon, podiatric physician surgeon. I'm here in Wenatchee, Washington, and that's where I met Dana as a patient. And I've been practicing for over 30 years now, and actually recently retired. And but I got an interest in metal allergies and metal reactions within the foot and ankle with metal I was putting in, probably over the past, decade and a half or two, and noticed these reactions that just didn't quite make sense to me, and then started paying attention to the symptoms that these patients had, not only locally, but systemically. And went ahead and started pursuing that more. And then Dana was kind of in the middle of that when I had already given some lectures. Then ended up, presenting to the FDA on systemic effects of metal allergies in 2018, 19. And but then Dana's case was just quite very significant. I actually presented his case at the FDA talk in 2019.
Yeah, and so viewers know that is where I ran into Dr. Schroeder and felt like his presentation at that meeting in 2019 was so jaw-dropping that, I didn't meet him at the meeting. I had to leave early, but I called him the following Monday and said, wow, can I please put your presentation online? And Dana, you were, as Dr. Schroeder said, you were in the presentation, and your story just absolutely floored me. And in light of the diagnosis of Celine Dion with stiff person syndrome, Dr. Schroeder and you both felt like, wow, this is something, your story is particularly pertinent in light of the fact that a lot of people have this kind of intermittent paralysis / neurological issues, or sometimes, periods where they literally get stiff and rigid and can't move. And that's thought to be something that's progressive and doesn't go away. But I want to hear your story. Just start from, how you got over stiff person syndrome, but begin, at the very beginning when you first had the first issues.
Okay. It started in 2008. I had gone to Dr. Schroeder before that as my podiatrist. In 2008, my toes started to curl under to where my toenails were almost on the bottom of my feet. And so I came into Dr. Schroeder's office, and he says, well, let's do some initial testing, did initial testing, and realized I had no feeling till above my calf on my leg. And he says, before I treat your feet, you need to go see a neurologist. So then I went to a neurologist, and they went through the sensations there. At that time, it was just my feet, although I did have lower sensitivity in my hands. But at that point, it was my feet. After doing all the testing, the neurologist came back in. I remember it so vividly. He came in and he says, the only thing I can do for you, it's kind of like good news and bad news. The bad news is you're not going to get over this. The good news is I have a handicap placard for you so you can get up front in the store. And it's kind of like, are you kidding me? And at that time said that I hate to give you this diagnosis because you're a young man. At that time, I was in my mid 40s. He says, but you're going to be confined to a assisted living facility. He says, we can see how long it's going to take to get there, but this is progressive idiopathic neuropathy. And so that's where that was. Worked there for a while, then said, what am I going to do? They sent me to the University of Washington, where they ran additionally a lot more tests. By this time, I had pretty much lost feeling completely in my legs, clear up to my calves, had to relearn how to open doors because I had no feeling in my hands, worked up to my elbows. The time I got back and then they referred me at the University of Washington, we tried all kinds of things. We tried Botox injections, trying to get my, and I don't really remember if that was to straighten out my toes or what it was, but working on that, because at this point I was getting to be very unstable because my toes had completely turned under my foot. So the toenails had all fallen off. And so I had ulcers on the ends of my toes. I had to use walking sticks or a cane because that's all I could do for stability. So he sent me to Mayo Clinic. And at that time that I went to Mayo Clinic, at this point, I had no feeling in my hands or legs. I mean, the only place I had feeling left was my core and my head. We went back to the Mayo Clinic. They worked through the whole analysis. And then their prognosis was basically the same, that we don't have anything there. They did see that I had spinal stenosis at T11, 12 that we could take care of. Now, that didn't have anything to do with my loss of feeling in arms and legs, but they said we should take care of it. Otherwise, it'll cause you bowel problems, various things later. She says, we're back at Mayo. Let's go ahead and do that. So I did have a surgery at Mayo Clinic that corrected the spinal stenosis. And following that surgery, I lost all my feeling everywhere in my body. The only thing I did have, I had a little sensation on the very top of my head, but my core no longer had feeling. And they said, hopefully this will pass. Give it a few months, maybe even up to a couple of years, you might get your feeling back. But we really don't know what it was. I do remember, though, after the surgery, I kind of felt some feeling in my toes, or I thought I had feeling in my toes. And then the doc came in and he says, well, actually, because when we were back at Mayo Clinic, they had done a sural nerve biopsy. So they go into your ankle and remove a nerve section. And of the 66 or 56 or 57 nerves there, the sheaths were empty, including the axial nerve, which was the one in the middle. And so the basically the neurologist says, so from that, you might think you're getting feeling because the anesthesia might heighten the intensity, but you're not going to. And when I left the Mayo Clinic at that time, it was the same type of diagnosis that you're going to end up in assisted living place. We're sorry for that, but that's what you've got. At that point, I wasn't in a wheelchair. I was at times in a wheelchair because it was very hard to walk on my feet. That was there. So following that, and after we did the spinal surgery in like July of 2010, I came back to Dr. Schroeder and says, okay, we've done all that. We don't know what it is, but I can't walk on these balls on my feet. He says, I can help you there. What we can do, and he can give more of that, but basically put pins in all of my toes, shorten some of the metatarsals and put screws in those, so that he gave me a very good platform to walk on, which was a miracle for me, because now what he did is shorten the toes, just gave me a good platform to walk on. So then I was stable, I was able to walk, and that was that in itself was a good thing. We were there. We don't know why I don't have any feeling. Again, just dealing with it. I don't know if you say evolving, but that's what I was, because having no feeling in my feet, the only way I knew what was there was to look visually seen, because I'm getting no feedback from my feet. Worst thing for me is walking into a mall, and if I wouldn't see a carpet that was there, I'm not going to lift up my foot high enough. So I'm going to trip on it and I fall flat on the floor. And since I have no sensation that way, I'm typically on the floor before I knew that I was falling. I mean, it's weird to explain, but that's the way it was. So that was life at that point. And so then continued on. Then my next weird neurological, and I can say neurological now because I happen to know what it is, but I woke up one morning and I could not move. I was paralyzed on my arms, legs, everything. I could not move my body. My alarm clock was going off. I couldn't turn it off. And I was paralyzed for about 45 minutes that morning before I could get up, shower, and go to work. Didn't know what it was, but immediately when I got there, I called Dr. Weiss, which was my neurological at the University of Washington and said, "Doc, sorry about this, but I got another symptoms." And of course, at that point, he says, "Well, these aren't related. It's something else, but we'll come and investigate it." So went and saw him. That was for 6 months probably, and it was kind of to the point where this is weird, but we really don't know what it is. I mean, having no sensory feeling is unusual. Could do done with the spinal surgery? We don't know. But with his final thought on that was, what we'd like you to do is every 3 months come in and talk to us so we can document what's going on. I mean, it wasn't doing anything for me. It was just they got a good medical research out of it, just watching what was happening to me.
Now, Dana,
So,
you were in your mid 40s. You must have been blown away by this. I mean, you can look back and, you're better now, obviously, but tell us what it was like at the time to be mid 40s and you're not diabetic. It's not diabetic neuropathy, not
no.
illness, very active as a person, right?
Right. So I was, and I basically threw everything into my job. Like I said earlier, I was a workaholic. I was an engineer. And at this point, well, let me talk a little bit more about the paralysis. So that first morning was 45 minutes, and then it would be 45 minutes every 2 to 3 days. And then it got to be, we realized that anytime that I would stop and do something. So the first scary point for me was in the office reading an email and just sitting there reading, a full page email, and realized that my arms were paralyzed. I could read, but I couldn't move. And so that was kind of freaky for me. Again, went back to the neurologist, but in that time frame, I was getting paralyzed every 3 to 4 times a week, anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours. I threw myself in the job because, like I said, what are you gonna do? It was freaky. I didn't know what to do, but I enjoyed my work. I loved what I was doing. And so at this point, I had moved up in my engineering career where I had staff working for me. So had some major construction, projects on the Columbia River, $100 million projects we were working on, had, 20 people working under me doing those things. And so when I would be paralyzed, like in my office, I had a wonderful receptionist and office staff. She knew what was going on. I mean, we were open about it, knew what it was. And so she was my filter, I would say. If there were employees that worked for me, she'd say, "Well, he's not moving. Go ahead and go talk to him," because I could understand everything. I was there. I could do it. And normally, and so the way it worked, if I was talking at the time, I could continue to talk. If I was moving, say, one arm, it would keep moving, but the rest of me would be paralyzed. So
go ahead.
So usually, in those instances, she would send them to my office. The fellow employees, colleagues, they would just tell me what they wanted done. I would totally understand it, but I'd have to, when I came out of my paralysis state, I'd write down what it was. And I was an engineer that worked to get the job done. I didn't work an 8 to 5 job. So if I came in and one day I was paralyzed for 2 hours and people came and told me what they needed to do, I basically got it done before I went home. I mean, my wife would know, oh, he must have been paralyzed today because he didn't get home till 5 hours later because I was working on something. So as far as my work went, that was all going well. Like I said, I had the receptionist who could cover for me. I don't know if it's cover for me, but she knew when I was paralyzed, and a lot of times just closed my office door, and so wouldn't have to do that. And that all culminated in January of 2011, on January 19th, because it was right after whatever the holiday was there. I heard my boss come into the front office, and the receptionist saying, "Well, he's a little busy right now. You don't want to do it." And it was kind of like, "No, I'm going to go talk to him. I want to, is he in there?" And it's long story short, she did everything she could to keep my boss away. Boss came in, and I was paralyzed, and I was told, "Are you gonna? I mean, if you're not going to respond, I'm concerned that you can't be working this way. And so I was basically terminated at that point from my employer. And so that was, I mean, now that was my life. I was working for that. At this point, I'm probably paralyzed for maybe 3 to 4 days a week, anywhere from, you know, sometimes they'd be up as much as 3 or 4 hours. But it was, I thought I was able to do the job. When I was terminated, that really changed the thing, because I don't know if it was stress or whatever had happened. Now my paralysis is turning into every day. I mean, and so now I'm going to doc and like, what can we do? Had a really good family doctor who was doing research, trying to, you know, various things that we could do for me, but there, you know, that was where it was. And so the downhill really started fast at that point, because from probably that time that I was terminated, I was paralyzed probably about every day. I mean, it would be that way. And those paralysis events moved up from 45 minutes to 3 hours to 4 hours to 6 hours. And at this point, then I'm back at University of Washington and said, you know, what can we do? Is there something we could do? And I mean, of course, ran me through all the typical neurological stuff. And it's like, there's nothing we can do. I mean, when your wife is tired of working with you, I mean, we can put you into an assisted living facility. That was their answer for that.
So Dana,
and so
what did you tell people in this period that you're talking about? When people would say, what's wrong with you? What would you say?
Well, I freeze up. I mean, I was just paralyzed. We don't know what it is. And that was very difficult. So my employer terminated me because working there, I had been paying for long-term insurance and disability insurance. So the employer was like, well, don't worry about it. You've got insurance. Of course, the insurance rider on it says, you know, once you give us a diagnosis and prognosis, I can't get a doctor to give me a diagnosis or prognosis. I do not have one. They don't know how long it's going to last. So at that point, I mean, we sold our home, because at this point, I didn't need to be where we were for work. And we looked for an area. We thought like Coeur d'Alene, Idaho was beautiful, and found a place just north of there that looked at Mount Spokane. And when we looked for this house, it's kind of like, we can be anywhere in the United States. We can be anywhere for this. So we went and found a house that had an upper floor with a wraparound deck, so that when I was paralyzed, my wife could wheel me out on the deck and I could look at the backside of Mount Spokane. I mean, which was a beautiful sight. We were on fairway 1 of a golf course. So when the golf, and again, same story there, when I'm paralyzed, I can't move my neck. So when golfers would come in front of me, I could see them. And then when they weren't, I would be seeing Mount Spokane. But as far as what we tell people, we didn't have anything. It was just, I just freeze up. And so everyone, you know, in our community kind of knew this was a weird thing, but this is the way it was. I didn't have an answer for it. Tried to keep positive attitude as much as I could, because I knew if I didn't, and also if I didn't stay active, I was going to end up in a wheelchair and assisted living facility. So that was my goal in life, is to not end up in assisted living in a wheelchair. So after we were there for a while, I got back with University of Washington medical staff and said, what can we do? Can I go back to Mayo Clinic? I mean, and because they had worked me up for neuropathy, idiopathic peripheral neuropathy, and they couldn't figure out why I didn't have any feeling in my body. So then I said, let's go back and figure out my paralysis. So went through that whole thing. And at that time, it was stiff man syndrome, now called stiff person syndrome, but it's kind of like you have stiff man syndrome or episodic rigid quadriplegia, which is just a really good name. It was good for me because now I can tell people what I got. And if you say you have episodic rigid quadriplegia, that's like, oh, okay. And they're not going to ask you any more questions, because that sounds like, but all that meant is I have episodes where I'm a rigid quadriplegic. And that's what I was. When I was not flaccid, I was rigid. Whatever position I was in at the time that I became that way, I was froze. I was stiff. And so that was, I mean, that's just the way life was. And so after we went back to Mayo Clinic, Didn't get anything there other than now I have a term I can tell people. They thought there was another, they went through another one that says, oh, we have hope for you. There's been a lot of research and a lot of studies and work that they've done on people with strokes on rehabbing them to do that. So would you be willing to come back and do in our program, we can get you working like what we deal with stroke patients. And they had all kind of really good stories to tell me on how all these people have improved. So I'm going back to Mayo Clinic. And my concern was then when we came there, why aren't we going to the neurological wing? Now we're going to the psychiatric wing. It's like, oh, and as the neurologist in Spokane had said, it's kind of like, I got this pill for you to take. Until you accept that you have this psychosomatic disorder, you're not going to get any better. That's what you've got to do. Then I realized when I got back to Mayo that time, not the neurology department, this is the psychiatry department. It's kind of like, we've got to do this. And I mean, one of the first things they wanted to do is see me when I was paralyzed. So let me step back again to explain that. So by this time, we knew that it would come on if I had been physically active and then stop moving. I had a very high incidence of freezing. So places that were some of the worst for that is if we go where we lived when we were in Royal City, we were like an hour from all shopping and things like that. I'd get in the car. By the time we got to town, I was completely froze. I could not move. My wife would go do the shopping. We'd come home. I would sit in the car in the garage until I thawed out and could move again, and then I would go. So we knew that if I stopped moving, there was a higher incidence that I would become paralyzed. Before I go to the Mayo, I'll do a little bit of daily life once we went to Idaho, because at this point we knew this was like a lifetime prognosis. This was this stiff person's syndrome. That's what I had. And so what we would do, it can hit me at any time. So I'm talking a 24-hour period. By this point, I'm being paralyzed 8 to 10 hours a day, or in that 24-hour period. If it happened, I could wake up in the morning and be paralyzed. And so I was going to be paralyzed until I could start moving. Or if it was in the evening, I'd be paralyzed probably till the next morning. But since we knew that it typically followed an activity event, if we could, what we would do is get up in the morning, we'd quick do water aerobics, because again, now I'm concerned about my body. How am I going to keep it going? How am I going to stay out of an assisted living facility? How I did that is we got up every morning, we did water aerobics for the first thing, we'd get dressed, we'd go play pickleball, and we'd do water aerobics from like 8 to 9, and then from 9 to noon or 1 o'clock, my wife and I would play pickleball until no one else wanted to play us for the day. And I mean, so we would do that. When we got home from playing pickleball, I knew that I had to eat as quick as I could, because otherwise I was paralyzed and I could not eat. So I we'd get home, I'd eat typically standing in the kitchen because I didn't want to sit down, standing in the kitchen. Then I'd either sit in a wheelchair on the deck, or sit in a chair on the deck, or sit on a couch. And then there I would be paralyzed. And typically if that was like 1 o'clock or noon, it would be more than likely 5, 7, 8 o'clock at night before I came out. If I was able to keep moving longer till like 5 o'clock, then I probably would be paralyzed until, I mean, I knew if I waited, if I hadn't been if I had not been paralyzed before like 5 o'clock, I knew I needed to go lay in bed, because I'm not going to be able to move until the morning. So now I'll jump forward to when we went to Mayo Clinic. And now this was the more on the psychological side. He wanted to see me frozen. So we knew that all we had to do would be go. We went and ate lunch, came back, and knew that if I sat down, it was going to happen. Well, we came back. He asked me sit down on the doctor examining room chair, and like clockwork, there I am. I'm paralyzed, and so he started just pushing me on the chair, first checking to see if I had reflexes, all that type of stuff. Then my wife clued in pretty quick. He was going to push me off of that table. And basically I could understand everything he said. He's saying, before I push him off, he will catch himself. And she's like, no, don't, I mean, not. And he pushed me clear to the very edge to where I would have, I mean, more potentially broken a bone. He pushed me clear to the edge, clear to the point where he could just catch me, and then kind of realize that wasn't it. Anyway, that was not a good experience. Spent that it was supposed to be there for a week, spent 3.5 days there. You know, they did things like hooked electrodes up to you so they could make your calf or your thigh muscle or your hamstring, they can make it flex. Well, the muscle would flex, and they're saying what we're doing is we're training you to now you can see your calf is flexing. Now move your leg. Well, I'm paralyzed. They can make my muscles move, but I wasn't moving it. So I was supposed to be in this retraining process. It took us 3.5 days and said, enough of this. We're not going to do it. Now I'll jump to my wife, which was my angel, still is my angel. But I mean, one had stuck with me through this whole time. Now, on the way home from Mayo on that time, she says, just like my parents, when you get older, you don't do as much. And he says, we need to travel. And so the other thing that happened is I didn't get disability insurance or anything. So we were going, I mean, that was scary when we didn't have money to pay bills. We had this disability promise, but it wasn't happening. I won't get into that, the whole legal process of that. Finally, we get that money, which is a little lump sum of money, but it's not a big lump sum of money, because my point is, this is by living on robin and tuna fish for 2 years, we now have a little. And she says, let's take some of that money and go traveling, because I mean, you know, at that point, my original Indian resting place was going to be assisted living place. Let's go do that. What that meant for her was that she, and later when I was going to physical therapists weren't doing anything for me. They didn't have much they would do. Bless my wife, she would go with me. But then she started asking them, what can she do? So they taught her how to use a gait belt, the proper way to lift me. Now I'm a big boy. But I mean, and she's 6 foot, so she can do it. But with a gait belt, she could wrestle me around and get me in a wheelchair and do that. So she says, I will commit. Let's go traveling. I will commit to making this work. And there were 3 things that that we had to adjust life to because of my paralysis. And the first being, we go to church. If I sit down in the pew, we would sometimes, my wife would wait sometimes 5 hours after a church service is over before I can get up and leave. Or if we're in a theater, the cleaning staff would say, we got to come clean this because we got another one. And she says, I'm sorry. He's, you know, I mean, it's just like, he's there. What can we do? So that was one. The other one she learned, the tough message was in a doctor's. So you wait for a doctor's office. The doctor finally comes in. Now I'm paralyzed. And I had a neurologist in Spokane that basically, I can't see. He says, I can't see. We came into the room. I became paralyzed. I was sitting in the chair. He came in, says, okay, take off your shoes and socks. So my wife quick bends down to take off my shoes. And he says, no, stop that. I want him to do it. And she says, he's paralyzed. He will not be able to do that. And he went in a tirade how I've wasted his time, money, other patients' time. There's nothing that he can do for me. So therefore, leave. I don't want to see you again. You've wasted my valuable time. And so after that visit, my wife knew when we got to a doctor's office, I would pace around in the waiting room and she would keep me talking, because then I could keep talking. So we had those tricks. The third place that I couldn't get away from, in church, I'd get up, you know, every so often to do that if we didn't want to. Normally at church, we didn't care. After it was over, I mean, I was going to be sitting there, and that's just, I mean, people got used to that. The third and worst place for us was, now we were wanting to travel again. If I sit in an airplane, what do? You put on a seatbelt, you don't move. I am paralyzed. If we go from Seattle or Spokane to Miami, I'm probably okay. I was probably paralyzed the whole trip, but I would be okay. Worst thing for us, from Spokane in particular, you're going to stop in Denver or in Salt Lake. Now you need to transfer planes. I walked on the plane. I sat in the seat. Now I'm paralyzed. My wife hits the call button, says, we need an aisle chair. my husband's paralyzed. First thing is the flight attendants are going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't see you come on. I don't remember." And she's like, "No, he walked on," which blows people. And so then people willing to help you isn't as much, because it's kind of like, what is this, a game or something? So my wife would get the gate belt, she'd get me out of the seat and get me in the aisle chair, and then airplane regulations, they'll have to push me off the plane. Then she has to take me from an aisle chair to a wheelchair to move me to my next plane, and then to back into an aisle chair. So what I'm telling you is my angel that did all these things is a real angel, because I mean, I don't know that I would have put up with that much. I mean, because like I said, aisle chair to wheelchair, wheelchair to aisle chair, back into a seat, and then we're there. And then hopefully the next time we got off the plane, I would be able to get up. Otherwise, we're in a wheelchair, and we would wait till I thaw it out before we would leave. I mean, that was just the way it was.
And clearly
So,
she believed you, but it sounds like a good portion of the people didn't believe you or thought you had some psychiatric illness. How did you feel about that?
well, that was other people, it was kind of that way. So my wife and I, we were just in our world, okay? Because we knew that that was the case. And what was really hard is people that I had worked with for like 25 years. Then you're hearing, I shouldn't say, my sister's at a party. She's with one of my fellow employees that I worked with for 25 years. And they said, "Oh, he's still doing that thing, huh? He's not moving." You know, I mean, and that's what really hurt me, is the people that I thought were people like, you know, good friends, at least work colleagues that I'd done. And then for them to have bought into the fact that, oh, you know, he's doing that again, or he's not moving. I mean, you know, I mean, and my sister and her husband say, "No, serious, is a real thing." But it's like those people you couldn't convince. And so we kind of got, my wife and I got to where we were, that's fine. We're not gonna try to convince people. It is what it is. That's what it is. And so we went on, like I said, we went on with life the way we would. We worked our days out. So we'd work out in the morning, do things. And then after that trip to Mayo, my wife says, "We got to get going." My prior to paralysis, and still to this day, my favorite is to cruise. I love cruising because you can go to places that you'd never go to otherwise. You can go to Colombia and El Salvador, and places that I wouldn't necessarily feel good flying to and staying at, but I'm in my room, I go out for the day and come back. But with that, we knew that if we woke up that morning and we had an excursion booked, and if I'm paralyzed, she's going down to the front desk and saying, "Sorry, we're not going to go." But we had our tricks. If I woke up in the morning, typically I was good to go. So we did a Mexican Riviera trip. We went snorkeling. We love snorkeling. I'll have to explain that here a little bit later, because twice I was paralyzed when I was in the water. It didn't freak me out because I didn't have any sensation. I was going underwater. Freaks out my wife because, I mean, here I'm going down. Anyway, we went down. We loved snorkeling before this, so we were snorkeling. And as long as I kept moving, it wasn't there. And so it was a mental thing for me. I got to keep moving, or this is the case. Hop out of the water, get in the boat. And then as I took my fin off, I realized that my little finger, or little toe on my left foot, had been bent back the whole time we were snorkeling. Now I have to really watch my feet because I have no feeling. So it's like, it's definitely broke. I mean, the toe is bent. Ends up being a little miracle for us, because then it's like, well, we're going to go back to Dr. Schroeder. So now in this time frame, he put the screws in my feet in 2010. We moved to northern Idaho. And so this is 2015. We haven't seen him for 5 years. So then we come back and say, "Well, here, Doc, we got a problem." Well, of course, Doc's like, "Well, does it hurt?" "No, I had no feeling." "Well, we'll just tape it to the toe next to it. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine," which was fine. But the good news was, he had seen my large toe on my left foot. It was moving. And the whole time that I was in Idaho, my foot just kept getting thicker and thicker, which we knew the family doctor was taking x-rays like every 3 to 6 months. And he could say, "Well, there's bone spurs, and it looks like the bone's thickening. It might be arthritis." In other words, he was monitoring it, but he didn't have anything to do. So then when I get back to Dr. Schroeder, he didn't care about my little toe, because that'll heal. That'll be okay. Concerned about my big toe, where it's going south. but he says, we can take those screws out of your feet. We can take those screws out because they're not serving a purpose any longer. I mean, the things that fuse. So
I have a question for Dr. Schroeder in this. Did you know at this point you had other patients that had neurological issues because of reactions between multiple metals implanted in the body? When he came in and you suggested taking out the screws in the toe, did you have a suspicion of what might have been going on?
Yes, but I didn't know at that time that Dana was being paralyzed. So when they first came in, he wasn't paralyzed. He walked in, like he does, but I had noticed, well, his big toe, it was starting to move and shift and curl and potentially ulcerate and cause problems. But I also noticed how thick the foot was now, and it was right over the area where we had the screws. And so, just looking at everything, we're going to have to address this big toe, and we were essentially going to fuse the toe straight, and because it was moving different angles and everything, so fuse it straight. But then I said, well, we're having an issue over where these other screws are, and the bone's healed. We don't need those screws, and he had a bunch of spurring around those joints also. And so I said, let's get those screws out. And then we clean up the bone. But then I started talking about some of the different issues that I had seen. Now, I had never seen anything this dramatic, but I'd seen some other issues, certainly. And I was explaining those to he and his wife. And I saw them look at each other. And they just kind of both looked at each other when I started explaining this, but they didn't say anything. And so then, okay, fine. We went ahead and went into surgery to fuse the big toe joint. And I said, well, we can use titanium for that one. And since I feel we're having a problem with the stainless steel, which most likely is a nickel allergy or could be a nickel allergy. And so, okay, fine. And so we went ahead and went in, fused the big toe and took those screws out. And then that first post-op visit, came back in, we're checking, that was like about 4 or 5 days, about 5 days usually, and checking for signs of infection, didn't see anything. And then the second post-op visit is when Dana came back in, and I'll let him explain.
All right, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Tell us about that second visit.
So to step back a little bit, to give an excuse for Dr. Schroeder, that was our life. When we had appointments like with Dr. Schroeder, he didn't know I was paralyzed. I didn't tell him I was paralyzed. We tried to live life like that. So what he didn't know is in his waiting room, I was pacing the whole time. His receptionist and staff might have like, well, that's kind of weird. Went into his room, did that, kind of keep staying active, moving when he did that, so I wouldn't be paralyzed. Because at the time we went in there, I was definitely being paralyzed 10 to 12 hours a day when that happened. And so we did that. And then he was in Wenatchee. At that point, we were in Idaho. So actually we were, over 200 miles away from where that was. So we got on Lake Chelan, we got a Airbnb type thing for the time we do the surgery, come back for it. Well, I knew kind of like immediately that the day after the surgery, I was only paralyzed for 3 hours, and it's like, well, this is crazy. And from the time from there until we saw Dr. Schroeder again, that's about what it was. We're now down to like 3 hours a day paralysis versus 10 to 12 before that. So that's when I said, hey doc, there's something here. And that was in one light, because he told us about he and his wife with amalgam and how the nickel allergy could cause that. And he said that, and it's like, there's something here. And then that's when he says, well, we need to get your blood off and get it tested. So initially we were going to try it somewhere in the United States. That didn't work. And then the Melissa Foundation, Melissa testing said, well, we'll do it, and we'll do it gratis. And it's kind of like, oh my goodness, Dr. States-Cole. I mean, I couldn't, we'll do that, because I know, I've been to Mayo now. Something, my insurance bills are like through the roof. Luckily, I was employed at that time, so I had most of those covered. But then, so they send this blood off. At that time, we were sending it to Scotland or Sweden. I don't know. Anyway, sent the blood off, And before you do that, you fill out the form of all the metal that you have in your body, which was kind of interesting because I'd never even, no one even said or done anything. So I knew the titanium screw I had in my knee. I knew the ones that Dr. Schroeder had put those stainless steel. But then I went into the dentist and say, okay, I got amalgam filling, I got crowns, and those are white gold. And the form was very specific, like what is in, not just white gold, and and it had palladium, and so I put the chemical compositions of everything I had in there. We send that off, and then the miracle of all miracles, it comes back and it's like, yeah, you're mildly allergic to the nickel and palladium. You're like off the chart allergic to. And so then from that, it's kind of like, okay, here's a plan we can move forward with. Here again for me, I'd gone from being paralyzed 10 to 12 hours a day, which I had taken in stride. I mean, you either laugh or cry. We're laughing, we're going with it. We knew how to adjust our life accordingly. And like I said, my angel wife, we were traveling. I mean, we were doing, but now this is reduced the amount of time that I'm paralyzed. And then we send this off and we do this and say, hey, doc, I need to get with you and my dentist, and we got to figure out a plan to do this. And of course, initially, and Dr. Schroeder's in Wenatchee, I had the ACL surgery done in Wenatchee earlier. So it's a colleague of Dr. Schroeder's. I said, well, I'll just go over to him and say, let's get that titanium screw out. That was one of the easiest, quickest things to do. And of course, even though he's a colleague of his, he's like, oh yeah, you're one of Dr. Schroeder's patients, huh? I mean, he says, I don't know that he said, I don't believe that, but we kind of got the feeling that he wasn't necessarily a believer. We'll say it that way. But he says, but it's this way. It's your knee. You don't need that screw any longer for the ACL. That's all healed up. We can remove it if you want to remove it. And I said, I want it removed. I want to remove it. And he's like, well, I'm not real sure. And then, of course, there were complications with that because I got a deep vein thrombosis after that surgery because they had immobilized my leg. Anyway, so ended up doing that, which the whole time the doctor's like, I told you all along, we shouldn't have done this. And I didn't see a dramatic, notable decrease in my paralysis. It was probably there. I don't even know. I didn't really see it, not as much as the 10 to 12 hours down to 3 hours. I didn't see that kind of change. But I went ahead and then I went and saw about 3 other dentists and talked about my teeth, what we could do for removing them. And most of them are very skeptical. And even the holistic dentists, which there are some, and I saw a couple of them, but they had their system of the way they wanted to do this. And a couple of those were a little out there. I could get into more details, but they were kind of out there. But actually, my dentist in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, he says, I know you as a patient. I also happen to go to his church. He says, I know you. Let me do the research on this. And so he had done the research and came up with, he didn't come, I'll back up.
Okay, go ahead.
He then researched and saw that you could put in a rubber dam so that the metal that he's grinding out of my teeth, removing the amalgam fillings, and when he took the crowns out, so none of those would get in my saliva and go down my throat. So basically they take a rubber thing, and the only thing they expose is the one tooth that they're doing, and all of the stuff that they're working out comes out of my mouth. So initially I had 6 amalgam fillings and 2 palladium white gold crowns that were going to be removed, and jump through the hoops of doing that with the insurance. And so he did 1 amalgam filling first, and it worked pretty well. He said, well, that was okay. Then I had a couple more. And so there's like 4 quadrants in the mouth. So the first quadrant had 1 amalgam, then there was 2 amalgam, and then the next one was 1 amalgam and a white gold crown. In that time frame, if I look back on it, my paralysis maybe decreased a bit, but it's like I'm still being paralyzed. I mean, there are still days that I'm paralyzed 2.5, 3 hours. I mean, there'd be days that it'd be like 45 minutes, but that's where it was. Then on November, we were going to go in and take the last amalgam and palladium crown out. And that morning, of course, I was paralyzed. I mean, as fate will have it. So now I'm in bed. My wife's getting the gait belt to get me out of the bed, to get me in a wheelchair, to get me in the car, to go to the dentist. And it's kind of like, if we could just reduce this a little bit, it would be helpful. And the last time I was paralyzed was that morning. We removed the palladium crown and the amalgam filling, and I have not been paralyzed since then. And that was in November of 2016. And so, I mean, I can't even tell you the joy that that is, and the new life that I have, and all that goes with that is just unbelievable. And so here I am now. I still am having issues with not having feeling, but again, I've kind of adjusted that way. I could look when you see me on the street, I kind of look normal. So I mean that's there, and not just there, but our life, we've got fulfillment of life again, and that's where I'm at, and that's where now my point is. And I went back to Dr. Schroeder and said, you need to get this out there. You need to write an article. You need to do something, because there's other people out there like me, and unfortunately they're swallowing the pill that this is the way it is, and we're going to be in a assisted living facility. Had I not been mid 40s at the time, that's probably where I'd end up. My neurologist at that time says, I just kind of hate to do you. You're pretty young. And he actually said, if you were over 65, that would have been your life sentence, if you would. I mean, he said that's what you do. But since you are so young, I kind of hate to do that. And that's why he sent me off to the University of Washington, and I went to Mayo trying to figure that out, just because I was that young and there wasn't anything that they thought they could do. I mean, that's where it is. And so that's where I'm at here, wanting to do this, to get out to other people that might have that, even though you're told, hey, it's in your head, or it's whatever, conversion disorder. I mean, I've been diagnosed with the whole gamut of those in this process. No matter what the diagnosis is, don't give up. Just keep going. I mean, so that's what we did, and happy we did it. So
that's amazing. It's an amazing story. And Dr. Schroeder, you mentioned Dana kind of said, I'm the mechanical engineer, or you've mentioned to me in the past, hey, I'm an engineer. Here's what I think's happening. Can you recount kind of what he said to you? Here's what I think's going on.
He came in, and that day, and when he went from 10 hours or so down to 3 hours, and he said, being the anal engineer that I am, I started looking at when I started getting all this metal into my body, and he kind of timed it out. And Dana says that of himself, and because he's just into all the details, right, Dana?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he went and looked at when he got his he had the amalgams and then the gold crowns, and then he saw when he had the knee, the titanium screw in the knee. And then I believe it was like after that or something, when you started developing these neuropathy symptoms. Then we progressed to then when everything, and when we have whether it's diabetic neuropathy or any type of neuropathy, that's when we can start. Each toe has 8 different tendons and 8 different muscles that go to it. So if you start getting an imbalance in those, because the nerves affect the muscles and they control the muscles, you start getting an imbalance of that, and then you start getting the curls and those toes curling. And that's what happened with Dana, where he's walking on the tips of the toes and then getting all these infections going on. So, and then he also had the prominent metatarsals, and I actually have a picture of his foot after the screws were put in. And so there's the 2. I mean, 4 screws in this foot, 4 screws in the other foot. That's it. That's what ended up paralyzing him. And this came on, I believe, Dana, about 3 months after you started after that surgery. Right?
Yes.
So you didn't connect it to this surgery at all.
So it was just those, I mean, just 4 tiny screws.
We did both feet, right?
Right.
Did both feet. So there was 8.
The reaction between that and the other metals in his body? Like, what? Explain for somebody who's never heard of any of this, as succinctly as you can, what was happening? Like, what was going on? Like, was it, the nerve, the conduction from the brain is being affected, or what was going on?
Oh yeah, this and I've had a lot of experience, and actually have done some studies since this, and actually it was Dana's case that really kind of triggered it in my mind, because I'm kind of like Dana. We want to know why and keep asking questions. I'm not I'm not accepting just where I'm at. I want to know more. And so with his case, then, yeah, so we ended up, I was already at that time working on the metal allergies and that type of thing, had lectured over in Australia, New Zealand on metal allergies, had been working with Dr. Stetskal. Vera Stetskal, she's an immunotoxicologist from Sweden, and she was the one who invented the ELISA test, which basically it helps diagnose type 4 hypersensitivity, which is something that it's basically the body's reaction to whether it's metals, other things, but in this case, metals. And so we'll get a reaction to the metals. And she developed a test that can determine this. And so after I saw, and heard with Dana's case, I go, oh, I know what we need to do. We need to get your blood sent off for this test. And there was a lab in the United States, but that didn't work out. So it ended up being in Switzerland. Where we sent Dana's blood to. And then actually Dr. Stetskal did the testing herself. And she goes, I'm going to be in Switzerland, send the blood, so it'll be here when I'm here, I'll do it myself. And that was, and she said, I'll do it gratis, given his situation, all this, I'm going to do it gratis. And like, I mean, your heart just goes for people like that. And obviously Dana and his wife did too. And and that's when we actually connected. We didn't, I didn't have an idea that it was connected to the mouth. But so we get the results back, and yes, it's positive, to nickel, kind of on the lower end, but then also high, and on this scale, it's like 2 to 4 is weakly positive, above 4 is positive, and there you go. Well, his palladium, they came back with his palladium at 129. 129. That's like off the charts. And so we're going, whoa, where does he have palladium? And and at that point, then that's where Dana really jumped in and found, I mean, he was already kind of looking at this, and he found out that his white gold crowns were 26% palladium. And then we go, aha. And so then, of course, amalgam, is about 50% mercury, which is not a good thing. And then what happened then, okay, in my mind, all right, we take the screws out. He goes from 10 to 12 hours a day down to 3 hours, but he's still paralyzed. Why would he still be paralyzed if the screws are what, potentially caused it? But then we're looking up in the mouth that, hey, he's allergic to palladium. And so then I'm going, okay, well, I'm wondering if we can have a reaction between the foot and the mouth as far as a galvanic type reaction. Because stainless steel is more negatively charged, and gold is a noble metal. It is definitely more positively charged. And so I'm wondering if we can be getting a galvanic reaction between the two. And if there's a reaction then with that's then contributing to this. And what I've since found out working with a number of different scientists and engineers that actually specialize in galvanism and galvanic reactions in the body, is that they didn't know about, actually they didn't even know about in the body. They know about in metals themselves. And so then I started testing some of the metals, and found out, like, just in my own lab in the kitchen, took a titanium plate I'd taken out of a patient and a stainless steel plate, and I worked with a neurologist here in town, actually the same one that Dana saw, and so I asked him, I said, can I borrow some of your equipment, electrodiagnostic equipment, to test this? And he goes, no, just get a really high quality voltmeter and some ultrasound gel. So I did, and I first tested, it was like 478 millivolt change between the two metals when they were just an inch apart. And I go, well, I'm dealing with, Dana's foot in his mouth. It's about 6 feet. He's a tall guy, and, about 6 foot apart. So I took my Hot Wheels track and ran it 6 feet, and then went ahead and tested between the two. Now, to put this in perspective, the action potential of a nerve fires off at 70 millivolts, okay, minus 70 millivolts, where what fires a nerve off, all right? And we are 400 and whatever millivolts, right? And so then I went ahead and took this 6 foot apart, and we were still 118 millivolt change between the two. So I'm going, I think we were having a galvanic reaction probably between the two. And subsequent to that, I've been actually doing testing. When I presented the FDA back in 2019, I actually presented that in the FDA talk, in my FDA talk, and that you saw. And then when I was there, we were talking amongst us, I forgot who all, boy, it sure would be nice if we could do that in vivo or in the body. And I go, I think I can do that. And so I have my own surgery center. So I came back and worked with some of the central supply sterilizing people to figure out how I can sterilize a probe. Well, they said, just take a cautery probe that we're already using, that's already sterile, and just cut the end off, hook it up to your terminals for your voltmeter and your plugins. Okay, and that's what we did. So I tested between the metals I was taking out of the foot and then the metals in the mouth, whether it was gold crowns or amalgam or stainless steel bars, porcelain fused to metal crowns, anything that I could touch. So, and I was testing, basically I could use stainless steel or titanium. So I was testing with those between the two, or nitinol, and which is 55% nickel. And so ended up testing, and I was getting on a consistent basis 200 to 300 millivolt changes before and after I would take the metal out of the foot. And then I would just test to the bone after I would take the metal out, but still test then to this. And so that's where we would get some of that. And then I'll actually even show you, because it's pertinent to this case. And so here is a porcelain fused to metal crown. And here I'm testing in the mouth, right? And so then here is there'll be a little bit of blood here. So, if you want to look away, that's fine. So, so there's the screw I'm testing on the foot, right? So then remember, minus 70 millivolts is where it fires off. And here we're minus 148 millivolts. Okay.
It's
and
twice
now,
as much.
Right, twice as much. And now I'm testing to the foot, okay, where the screw is taken out, just to the bone. And now we're plus 60.
Wow.
So an over 200 millivolt change, before and after I take the metal out. Now, what I've subsequently learned with that is from my colleagues, the engineers who specialize in galvanic corrosion. They specialize in that within the body. And so I was sitting there telling her that, hey, I'm getting these things, but gold is a more noble metal, and usually it's the less noble metal or the stainless steel that would corrode faster. And actually, that's what'll happen. It's like a battery reaction. So you have like a battery reaction in your body, and then you will corrode the metals faster. And corrode them faster.
Because of the electrical current being created between the two dissimilar metals in the body, speeds up the corrosion of one or both metals.
Correct. Right. And now these will be released. These ions are released into the body. And if you happen to be allergic to them, as Dana was, then guess what's going to happen? And so what she explained to me was that, I said, hey, well, the more noble metal is the gold, and then the less noble metal is the stainless steel. It should be the stainless steel that's the one that, probably was also, okay. But she goes, well, what you got to remember here or think about, or what is happening, the gold has gold in it as well as palladium, okay? Palladium is a less noble metal than the gold. So now with the reaction from down here, then this is going to kick this reaction off up here in the tooth. So then the palladium is going to be released faster. And indeed, Dana, in what you had showed me and what you told me, underneath all of your gold crowns was what?
Corrosion. I mean, that was what I had. So the dentist had gone to some extra work, in coming up with the rubber dam in order to do that. When he took it out, he took the crown out, and then he was gone. And I was waiting in the exam room, and where he went, and he says, well, I just put it under a microscope because it's like corroding the back side of that, of the crown that he had removed. So
there you go.
It's a perfect storm of reactions to metal, galvanism, which is a reaction, an electrical current essentially being created between metals, kind of like battery technology. And in light of how many people have metal in the mouth and then you know, what, 1 in 5 people so far have implants in the body. Many of those are metal. I mean, what's the takeaway for people who are just kind of watching this?
Well, oh yeah. And I've been working with, doctors all over the world. I've been working with, patients all over the world because they have these just like Dana's case. I mean, this is not a unusual case. I mean, it is because of how the stiff person syndrome. I mean, there's been no that I hear of. There's been no quote documented treatment for that. And Dana is the first case. I guess we're documenting it now. We'll end up writing a paper on this with a number of professors and other docs. But here is a treatment that, and hey, he's living proof that he was paralyzed, and now he's not. Once we were able to sort this all out through everything that the stars were aligned. And so that is great. But other things that I'm seeing though, and actually this was actually Dr. Stetskal, and unfortunately she passed away from breast cancer a few years ago. But she, in Europe, they were seeing a patient, let's say with a hip or knee implant that was painful. It was giving him problems. But then they'd remove amalgam or other dental implants, or not implants, but or it could be implants, but dental metals, and the pain in the knee or hip goes away.
So what was happening? What was causing the pain?
Well, my theory and belief is that it was a galvanic reaction going on. Okay. And then it's whether it was causing, release of ions or just the reaction there going on, the galvanic reaction causing the pain potentially, or they were allergic or what have you to the metals, one or both. That was going on. The other thing then was I had that in my patients where I removed stainless steel from the foot, but she had chronic, or she had back pain with a titanium plate and screws in her back, and that was 8 out of 10. That was going on for a number of years. I removed the stainless steel from her feet, the back pain went away.
Wow. Well,
so that she never had to have the back hardware removed.
That's amazing. It's just stunning. And I've heard this, I've known about this for what, 4 years now, and I'm still blown away. Take us back to how shocked you were. I would assume you were shocked when you realized, wow, people are being paralyzed and being told this is just it for life. And you realize in some people, this is perhaps reversible or treatable.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
It's the feeling is quite incredible. When I heard Dana's story, and then I'd seen this a number of times since then. Also, not that particular symptom or to that degree. I have had spasticity and cramping that just would last, and after I removed like stainless steel in this particular patient, it all went away overnight. Where she had been taking all kinds of medications for years, it would happen every night, and she was just in agony every single night. And then I took the hardware. She had a tight or a stainless steel plate and screws in her ankle, and I had then fused her big toe joint. And once I removed all that hardware, it went away. But now it just gave me a mindset to really look and ask other questions. When I'm a foot and ankle surgeon and I'm asking to look into their mouth, I mean, they think I'm kind of weird, but really, I don't care what they think or what anybody thinks, really, because I know, because I've learned from my patients over the years, and I talk to other doctors, other surgeons, and they're kind of, some of them will roll their eyes and just kind of, whatever. But I really don't care, because I've seen so many, patients, and even just recently, it was a psychologist from Boston who contacted me because she heard of me from somewhere, or somebody referred her. And and she had gallbladder clips and found out she was allergic to nickel and had them taken out and got an improvement in symptoms, but then she went downhill again. And then, what I will do, I'll start asking questions. And okay, what other, do you have any other metal in your body? No. All right. What surgeries have you had? Oh, well, I had a belly surgery. Okay, you need to get an x-ray, make sure you have no other clips from the belly surgery. And okay, what else have you had? Oh, I have my parathyroid gland removed on my neck. Oh, okay. So did they tell you about, having any metal there? No, they never mentioned any metal. Well, you need an x-ray. So she gets an x-ray. She has 25 clips, titanium clips in her neck. And so she ended up then, okay, well, she ends up to the point that she cannot get off her couch for more than 5 to 7 minutes. I mean, this was a gal who was very active, like Dana. She wanted to go, walk, multiple miles with her friends, all this stuff. She could not get off the couch for more than 5 to 7 minutes. She was to the point of, she checked in Europe for doctor-assisted suicide because this was not life worth living. And this is with many of my patients. I've heard this, that they just wanted to give up because they couldn't, deal with this. So anyway, so she ends up finding a surgeon actually in her area that was willing to go in and remove these and make at least an attempt at it. And they were able to get 24 out of 25 out. The last one was right around where the nerve was. So there was concern that they would lose her voice. So, okay, left that one. We'll see how we do. Within 3 weeks after that surgery, she walked a couple miles with her friends.
Wow.
I mean, that's the type of stuff I see.
That's amazing. And when you think that about, a lot of my friends, I've made friends with with people like me over the years. And many people have surgery and don't know that clips are used now. Like my stepdad did hysterectomies. He just used sutures. And there are a lot of surgeries now that, used to be done without metal. Now they're being done with staples and these staplers and these, clips. And people are finding out they had no idea that this surgery, I'm getting an organ removed, a thyroidectomy, a gallbladder removal, appendix, uterus, maybe some ovaries. They have no idea that there could be metal in their bodies related from, these surgeries. And so then when you have trouble walking, you don't go back to the organ, removal surgeon, and it would never occur. And it shocked me when I looked up on PubMed and couldn't find any studies about galvanism in the body. Like you said, there are plenty of, this is well known among dentists. And I remember one time I had a gold crown and a silver crown, and they kind of zapped me when I clenched my teeth. And so I remembered that, and we just changed it and it worked out fine. But to think that people are paralyzed, it just blows my mind.
And it's not just paralysis. So other symptoms that I've seen and had patients get better or just dramatically, improve. And so fibromyalgia, very common. Okay, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, sleep disorders, whether it's not being able to sleep or sleeping too much, just can't wake up because they're tired all the time. Migraines, headaches, stiffness, of all their joints. I mean, I had a number of patients where I removed the hardware from their feet, and one gal, she was in her 30s. She couldn't open a doorknob with one hand. She had to use two, and she couldn't button her blouse. She was concerned who's going to take care of her, 8 and 10-year-old daughters. And I removed two stainless steel screws from her foot, and it may be titanium or stainless steel. It's happened with both of them. Next day, open up the door fine, button up her blouse fine. And then a year later, I did surgery, and that was way back when, and I didn't understand this all at that time. And then next year I went back and really we didn't have a whole lot of titanium way back then either. So I did surgery on her other foot with two stainless steel screws. Guess what happened? It all came back. She couldn't open, so that kind of, there's something going on here. Yeah, that was one of the first cases, that something is going on. So, but other things, as far as GI problems, especially if there's metal in the mouth, because what happens to saliva? If you have a high, hypersensitivity reaction to whether it's amalgam or mercury or nickel, which can be in a number of these, gold, what have you, and then you swallow that saliva, where's it going? So you're looking at potential IBS symptoms, irritable bowel symptoms. Yeah. And, a lot of stiffness in the neck I see for whatever reason, from stuff that I put in. I can hardly move my neck, or back pain, low back pain is is one that's up there also. So there's a number of anything neuromuscular in my mind, anything neuromuscular. Can be potentially related to a metal hypersensitivity reaction, and then can be exacerbated by, if you have a metal toxicity. Now that's different, where you're talking about the ions, right? And that's what Dana had referred to earlier. They didn't find any, toxicity, because they were looking at the metal ions in his body and didn't find that. But that wasn't the problem. So you can't just test that. You need this other test. You need to look at the hypersensitivity.
That makes so much sense. And my story is I had metal on metal hips releasing cobalt ions into my body. Pretty sure I'm allergic to nickel. Never got tested, but when the way my skin reacted and cheap earrings affected me. But it affected me neurologically in a very dramatic way. Many issues there that are gone now, that I've had that particular, the cobalt, chromium, nickel, molybdenum metal removed. But my delta this whole time was like, okay, my cobalt toxicity test showed that I was only 4 parts per billion at the worst. That was the highest it ever got. And other people had much higher levels and weren't as affected. But now that just explains why, if I had the nickel hypersensitivity, delayed reaction, I have multiple metals in my mouth. That might be why I was having, even though my toxicity number was, not enough to worry about. Yeah, but I'm not right. And, when people might watch this and say, well, my doctor would have caught this. I mean, I've seen a doctor. I mean, he would know to look for that. We did blood work.
Well, I have one thing that come back because you had asked the doctor that, but so in my process, I was diagnosed with spasticity, dystonia. So my point is, I was given those diagnoses early on. Also, I had the markers for MS. I had the markers for Parkinson's. That was a stymie to them because those are on opposite sides of the neurological spectrum, and I had markers for both of those. So then they're trying to do that. But I'm just saying, I was diagnosed with spasticity. I was diagnosed with dystonia. I was diagnosed with potentially MS, and sent to a specialist for MS, sent to specialists for Parkinson's. And then I remember so vividly going back to Mayo Clinic because they thought I had Lou Gehrig's disease. And so I remember it so vivid because I walked into the guy that's like the expert on that back at the Mayo Clinic, and it was my wife and I were there, and I walked into there and said, we've been suffering with this for like 4 or 5 years. And he looks at me and says, you don't have Lou Gehrig's disease. And my wife's just like, you haven't even heard the whole story. You haven't touched him. He says he wouldn't be alive this long if he had it. Your lifespan would have, once you have it, you got 2 years or your lungs. So my point was, I went to all kinds of specialists which were with diagnoses that they thought that I had, or it was a diagnosis I was given. And then when you go to a high enough specialist, like we can say, then it's like, no, you don't have this, you don't have that. And after we ruled out all those others, then it's like, oh, you have conversion disorder, or you have a psychosomatic disorder, because we couldn't find a physical one. So that would be my point to tell people is, even if you've been diagnosed with dystonia or spasticity, those are real valid disabilities. Those are things that happen, but it doesn't mean that's necessarily what you have. And then, like I said, then we rule that out, and it's not that, and it's not this, and then it's the psychological ones. Then it's kind of like we can do that, because how can we really determine that? And it's frustrating to me that after I did this, and I'm knocking on my neurologist, or I'm going to the people that were not believers that I had something going on. I go there and they said, well, I don't know. I would like you to go to a psychologist to get a verification so they could do an exam. I said, fine, let's do it. So I go do it. And then they say, well, it must be in remission because we don't see it now, and it's like, are you kidding me? I mean, it's like we're still not going to believe that. And that's, that's my point is wherever you are, whatever you might be diagnosed with, don't give up because, I'm up walking around today living a normal life because we didn't. And luckily, coincidence happened the way I did and finally got back to where we got those removed. And now I'm here. Had that not been the case, if we'd have been content when I was in my mid 40s, we'd have got till my wife got tired of me and put me in an assisted living facility. So I'm glad that we continued on this path and did it. And that's what my goal in this is to get people out there to know that don't give up. Like stiff person syndrome. I mean, that's what it was. That's all we could come up with. And there's nothing we can do about that. Well, there isn't maybe anything you can do about stiff person syndrome, but they removed the metals and I'm now up and going. So maybe I didn't have that, but that's what I'm saying. I mean, don't give up is my goal.
And I'm so happy that you're better. First of all, Dana, that's just awesome. And no slight to doctors, but a lot of people just say, well, I'm not a doctor, but that doesn't mean you should stop looking, stop trying to learn, stop investigating. Just because the doctor gave you a diagnosis doesn't mean it's correct always. It might be more complicated than that. And you kept looking. And thankfully, in Dr. Schroeder, you had a doctor who was curious. And people don't understand that not everyone's curious like that. And so they just, oh, well, he said it's this. So now it's this. And think about how many people have gotten a Parkinson's diagnosis or an MS diagnosis or a stiff person syndrome diagnosis and then just headed on to the assisted living facility and accepted it. It might have been something that could be fixed, remedied.
Right. And that's my point is don't give up. I'm not saying that those things aren't, I'm not downplaying those are there, but don't just assume that. And that's where I wasn't going to give up because that was kind of the path that they went down just because it didn't meet any of the medical knowledge at that time of what it was. And so therefore that's what my diagnosis was, if we would. And like I said, I had a whole plethora of diagnoses over the time. And it seemed like the psychological ones were the ones that stuck because they couldn't physically say, we can't do a test to prove that it's this or that. And so, I mean, that's what I was left with.
Did you ever think maybe I am crazy? Did you ever doubt yourself in all of this? I mean, I certainly did.
No, I didn't. For me, that wasn't, I knew what was going on. I knew what was happening. It was, and that's why I said earlier, my wife and I, we just kind of went off their own way. We knew what it was. We're going to deal with it. This is what it is. But there was never a day in my life that I looked that I was going to swallow that pill and say, this is what it is. And that was really tough. I'll tell you, jump back a little bit. Clear back to the point with the disability insurance. All you got to do is say you got a psychosomatic disorder. We'll sign the paperwork and you're good to go. It's like, I'm sorry, that's not what I have. But that's what I'm saying. I mean, those are tough things. Saying all you got to do is say this is it. You got to accept, swallow this pill. That's what the neurologist kept saying. Just swallow that pill. Once you accept it, then we can start working to make you better.
Wow. And you're a strong person. I wasn't. I am now that way. I know what I know. But 12 years ago, I had so much self-doubt that, I just, well, the doctor said everything's fine. So I guess it's just in my head. And it wasn't. I believed other people instead of believing my own body. So I think that's a lesson for a lot of people out there. Just, trust yourself. If it doesn't feel right to you, if it doesn't make sense, keep looking, keep trying to find someone like Dr. Schroeder. What advice do you have, Dr. Schroeder, for patients that don't have a Dr. Schroeder in their life? Other than call you, because I've sent us so many people.
A big thing is the timeline on when things happen to you. Okay, the timeline of like in Dana's case, timeline. So because especially if we're dealing with metal allergies, okay, which the symptoms can be I mean, there's so many different symptoms. I've already explained some of them. That's not even all of them, but like in Dana's case, it was 3 months after that we put the screws in, but some of them are 6 months, some are a year, some of them are 2 years. that it'll come on after some type of an implant, because it's a type 4 delayed hypersensitivity reaction. Type 4 delayed hypersensitivity. So that means delayed. So, and that's just your body, that its immune system is kind of kicking in. It sees the antigen, the hapten, and then it starts, reacting to it. And all of our bodies are different. And some will come on right away, but others, it's going to be years, potentially. So you look, okay, what happened before? What did you have going on? And so I do have an example, if you want to hear it, as far as a patient who I had operated on, I think in June of this particular year. And it was titanium plates and screws I had put in. And then I will let her kind of explain what happened after this.
All right. So you had some reconstructive right foot surgery with titanium plates and screws. And just recently, this last week, we got the plates and screws out. And prior to that, what did your body feel like?
Since June, I have been experiencing all over body pain, fatigue, joint stiffness, and then nerve pain in the foot and going up the leg to the back.
And what about your focus? Or
I've been in kind of a brain fog since the surgery. I thought it was the anesthetic for quite a while, but 4 months later, it really hadn't worn off much. I wake up in the morning and I feel like I haven't rested at all. I get home at night and I just can do nothing, because just going to work has been enough, and it's just been mentally taxing.
And since getting the hardware out, what have you been feeling?
The first thing I noticed when I went home was a lot of energy and feeling like I just was thinking clearly. Other than the local pain from the surgery, the overall body pain was gone. My back pain was gone. The nerve pain is gone. The aches, the joint pain, all gone.
All right. Thanks.
So that is the type of thing I would see quite consistently, with this.
And that's
Rash, all over body rashes, or just local areas also.
so many people are told that reactions to titanium, well, I've heard, hey, metal allergies aren't a thing, but we don't think of it. I mean, titanium, you think of as pretty much inert. I mean, a lot of people are told, you can't react to titanium. And that's what she
That's what she had. I've had so many patients with reactions to titanium similar to her. And and I was the one that put the metal in. I put it in. Luckily, I can start seeing what the symptoms are pretty soon afterwards, and I ask the questions. But who does surgery on the foot and ankle or somewhere else in the body is going to be asking about headaches and stiff neck and all joint fingers that are sore and all this. And unfortunately, a lot of these patients, they get the psychologic diagnosis like they were trying to give to Dana, and then they're told they're crazy. And a lot of patients, will tell me that they just, and they have to see multiple people. And my recommendation too with docs, if you visit a doc and you're not getting, they're not buying into it, just leave. Don't try to convince them, because most likely you're not going to. And it may not, maybe it's not a metal allergy, but you should at least get it checked out. And there's to get things checked out. I mean, there's a lymphocyte transformation test, as well as the ELISA test. The ELISA one is a more global type test and very, very high quality. It's been clinically validated. It's out of Germany, and really the base is in London, but they do the testing in Germany, or also in Switzerland. I just heard actually from the CEO not long ago that from them that they are going to start, there's a lab up in Canada they're working with. And that's what we've been pushing for, to try to, because it's hard to get the blood there in time. And then anyway, so this facility is supposed to be in Canada somewhere, which will be great for us here in the United States. And so that'll be good. And so there's another one here.
The insurance companies. Next, we have to get the insurance companies to pay for it.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Yep. And there was one L&I company, an L&I here in Washington State that covered, it was a patient who worked for Boeing. And was basically, it was a very difficult case and had number of surgeries over in the Seattle area. The surgeons actually were the one that referred him to me. And then L&I approved the testing. And so we were able to get the testing. Sure enough, allergic to nickel. And then, it was difficult surgery to get all the metal out. And they wanted me to do that. So I did. It was a 4-hour surgery to get all the various metal out. But he made quite significant improvement after that.
And people might assume, because we all know we get pre-op blood work. So you're going to have surgery. Your doctor sends you in for blood work before the surgery. A lot of people would assume, oh, well, surely they'd check me for this before they implant something in my body. But that's not the case, right?
Oh, it's rarely the case. Yeah. Do I think we should go that way? Yeah. If it was my family member, what would I do? Before they got especially a total hip or knee or something, I would absolutely. Actually, this has happened with my wife's very good friend, and she was just going, oh, I'm fine. I go, and then I started telling her all the issues that I've said. And she already has problems. She can't wear jewelry. She's on chronic, high potency steroids because of these rashes that come up from her eczema. So those are all, those types of things, especially the earrings for the women, skin rashes that come up, eczema. You're an allergic type of person, and you go in and have a total hip or knee or other surgery that involves metal. You have to have a backup plan. But first of all, what you're going to want to do is get tested. And so, she was going to have a foot and ankle implant, a total ankle done. And so we ended up just actually next week, she's going to send her blood off. And again, right now for Eliza, it's too far to really get the blood from the West Coast over there. But there's one in Chicago called Orthopedic Analysis that we've utilized and have had good success with as far as being able to test all this potential thing. As far as I think there's some sensitivity things and whatnot that I'm looking forward to the Eliza one coming in, with some of the way they do things. They look under microscopy also, so they're looking at the lymphocytes to see if they blow up on us. And that's what on both of Dana's things, and that's the thing on his nickel, where he had a 2+ on the microscopy, where they're looking under the microscope and see the lymphocytes blowing up on the nickel, as well as really blowing up on the palladium. And so that's where it's a backup, to check things. And then sometimes you'll have a negative on the regular test, but then the microscopy is positive. And so then they'll read that as a positive, which has been helpful in catching some of these too.
And the skin patch tests aren't quite sensitive enough to catch a delayed hypersensitivity. A lot of people say, well, oh, I got a skin patch test and it was all negative.
Right. Yeah. And it can, and I've certainly had things catch, things, but Mayo Clinic did a study, especially with titanium, and because the titanium particle is very big, and titanium, like dioxide, is in sunscreen. And, to help block sun. Well, that's because it can't penetrate the skin. It stays on top. It doesn't go into the pore. It doesn't go through the skin. So it stays on top to help reflect everything, and keep the sun out. But it's a big molecule, so it doesn't, so it's rare that you can get a positive, skin patch test. And then Mayo Clinic did a study in 10 years. They didn't have one positive test, a titanium patch test. But they had multiple patients who had a titanium hip or knee that had a reaction, had to have things replaced. Now, I did just have a patient recently who had positive titanium patch tests, which is one of the only few that I've heard of. And in her case, she had porcelain fused to metal crowns and titanium posts up into and she could not put her, and this is another thing we're seeing, she couldn't put her cell phone up to her ear. Her face would go numb within minutes and her muscles would start twitching. Okay. And she could not move her shoulder up above her arm, up above, 90 degrees without significant pain. It was hard for her even to get dressed or shower. And I just spoke with her the other day. And also she had actually the case that I just showed you, with porcelain fused metal crown, that was her. And a
lot of people think they have only ceramic. They look in their mouth, it's all white. Yeah. I don't look like I have any, but you explained that in some cases it's porcelain over a metal. So you need to double check that.
Yeah, and in her case, that was also true. She had actually a toxicity to mercury, and she had a bunch of mercury, fillings, and she went bipolar. I mean, she's a professor at a major Ivy League school, neuroscience professor, and went bipolar, and thought she was just going to be braiding hair down in the Caribbean the rest of her life.
Yeah, and
And
you
kind
don't
of like Dana,
become
but she wouldn't give up. She's going, no, I'm a single mom at this point. I need to just keep persevering. And so anyway, she heard me. She was writing a book actually on amalgam fillings, because once she got them out, and she didn't do it properly, and then had all kinds of issues. But then she was able to get over that. But she heard the FDA talk, and then contacted me to see if she could quote me in her book. And so I said, sure. And then later, she came to me saying, well, they say I need a total shoulder implant because I have arthritis. So we looked at her, and I looked at the X-rays, and I'm not a shoulder doctor, but I look at X-rays all the time with arthritis, and I go, yeah, it looks like you have some arthritis, but doesn't look too bad, Anyway, so she came to me. We got this, and she tried to get the screws out over there. They didn't want to take the screws out. She had some arthritis around her big toe joint, and they wanted to fuse that joint and put a plate and multiple screws. She goes, no, I don't want more metal. Just take the screws out, and they refused to do it. So she goes, Scott, can I just fly out and have you do it? Sure. So that's why she came out, and we did it. Well, the next morning I went to take her to the airport, and she hadn't been able to move her arm, for years, and could hardly get dressed. All this. And so the next morning I went down to get her, to bring her. I said, okay, I'm going to come down and get your bags to bring you to the airport. Well, she's crying. I mean, tears just flowing down her face. She's 62 years old, I believe, at the time. And I go, oh, is your foot hurting? It's a very small incision, and no, it doesn't hurt at all. But look. And she raised her arm over her head. Wow. And she goes, I haven't been able to do this for years. She goes, I started getting dressed this morning and could get dressed. And and long story short, then 2 weeks later, she had her dental work done. And and then her shoulder froze up again. And after having, yeah. So then she was allergic to molybdenum. That we knew prior to getting the stainless steel out, which in stainless steel is nickel, molybdenum, and chromium, and then some other metals. But anyway, so then she got patch tested the titanium, which she has in her mouth, right? So anyway, she worked on. We're also working with a research dentist on these papers, and so we had all talked. You got to get those out. So she ends up getting one out, and then she ended up getting the other one out. And underneath the other one was a big glob, underneath the crown, a big glob of amalgam. So basically mercury, which she had all this toxicity to before, was still in there, and she had no idea that it was buried and hidden underneath the crown. And that's what's happening with some of these crowns. They get the amalgam underneath there. And
her bipolar disorder, did that kind of resolve after she figured all this out?
That resolved after her amalgam out. But she still had some amalgam, but it was kind of, sandwiched in between the crown, and the rest of the tooth. So hopefully it was shielding the body to a degree, but still, so she still had these other symptoms, where she couldn't, it was hard for her to move, all this stuff. Well, she ended up getting both those out ultimately. And then the day she got the last one out, then she just really started improving. And now she sent me videos. She can do this. Nope. Yeah. And so she can move, she can function in life again. She can hold the cell phone up to her ear again now. All that's gone. The EMF stuff's gone, and I'm seeing that more and more too, with the being around the computers and 5G and other things that can affect some of these patients. So.
Well, we have about 7 minutes left. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Dr. Schroeder, for sharing your stories. What are some takeaways? What have I missed? What would you like to say? Well, Dana, we'll start with you.
Well, just don't give up. And that's, for me, it's easy. I was an engineer, so I'm always thinking that I'm right and not. So when I'm being told, no, it's not right, I'm just saying that's the biggest thing is don't give up and don't get down. And if nothing else, get another opinion. I mean, and like all this new research is out, we're finding out about what the metal that is in our bodies. The biggest thing I can say is don't give up don't take a diagnosis at face value. Look at it, keep digging, and that's what I did, and it worked out well for me. And so, like I said, I just try to get other people out there to not give up, and and again, thank my wife for not putting me into an assisted living facility, because I'm here today doing what I want, seeing grandkids. So I'm really happy.
Dana,
Yeah.
also, when you heard about Celine Dion's diagnosis, that was part of the reason. Talk about when you first heard about her stiff person syndrome diagnosis.
Well, actually, I heard about her diagnosis, and then more the thing that got me was the medical world's response to that. In other words, the University of Washington, which I had gone to, is saying there's nothing we can do. I mean, we got these, we can change your diet and do this, but I mean, this is what it is. That's what she's, this is the cards that she's been dealt. Now she needs to deal with it because there's nothing you can do. And I'm saying, I'm one of them. Now, whether I have the stiff, whether she has metal in her body, I don't know. Whether she has the same thing I have, I had that diagnosis again from Mayo Clinic, said that's what you've got, and I'm up walking around, and I didn't take that, and that was more what troubled me when I saw her, because of course I saw her interview, but then I, being an engineer, I'm digging through and looking at the reporting on that, and all the three major reports that I saw on it was, there's nothing you can do. This is the course that she's going to go, and it's like, no, listen to me. I've been there, done that. You can do. There's something else you can do. So that's what I saw there, and needed to get. That's why I say I'm glad you're doing this. I'm glad to get the word out that I'm one of those people. I was diagnosed that way, and I'm up. I'm not a stiff person any longer.
It's awesome. And Dr. Schroeder, you can talk about any last things that I need to mention or that you want to mention. And also, when you heard about Celine Dion.
Yeah. So actually, I heard from two people that heard me lecture in London. One was one of the other lecturers that had dealt with metal allergies and scoliosis patients, because they have these implants placed that they, at a young age, and can get, end up getting a delayed hypersensitivity reaction too. But anyway, she contacted me, was the first one to contact me. And then another person that heard me speak over there contacted me, because I didn't hear about it, but it was just right afterwards. And so your camp has to get in touch with her camp, and we tried, but we haven't, heard anything back. And, I'm sure everybody tried to contact her or whatever. So anyway, but what also on that point, though, is that it may not just be what I see. I've had a number of patients that don't have metal in their body, okay, but can have similar reactions, and just from being allergic to nickel, okay, and because where do we get nickel? Every single day in our foods. Oh yeah, yeah. So foods can be nutrition, but foods can be poison, and especially if we're allergic to these. And according to at least one of the studies through FDA, is 18 to 20% of us are allergic to nickel. And so you have a nickel, and I am, and my wife is, and two of my daughters are. And talk about a diet that we have to just be careful of all the time. I actually had something on my phone that would list everything, because for the first couple of years of dealing with this, I'd screw up all the time. But and just the other day, last night, my wife brought something home for me to eat, and that was not good. I just start getting a brain fog and other things, and and then typically it's going to have soy in it, because things that are high in nickel, is chocolate is one of the highest, whole wheat, beans, any kinds of nuts, okay, and seeds, and then soy is very high, spinach, kale. So there's a number of different things, and you can just Google that online for a low nickel diet and then see. But I've had patients that have fibromyalgia symptoms have gone away just from changing their diet.
Wow.
So,
but you have to know. You have to
what's
know.
that?
You have to know you're allergic, and this is not something that's in like routine testing. That's
Right.
not something you're getting checked for when you just go for your annual checkup with your GP.
And yep, and I totally think that should be just like a CBC. You know, when we're getting going in life or whatever, we should have a metal allergy test. And because there's so many foods, I mean, have titanium dioxide in a lot of your metals, or a lot
Skittles.
of your vitamins. Yeah, Skittles, right? Skittles. You know, so and you don't know if you're allergic to those or not, but it can be life changing when you find that out. When you find out you're allergic to a metal that you had no clue you're allergic to, and then everything makes sense. You know, what was dark now becomes light, and then you can look back. Oh, I just ate that, and maybe the next, you ate it a day before, or just hours before, and then it may last 2 or 3 days. So then if you keep getting these things on top of each other, then you don't know what's going on. So, and I think, and I just met with some people. They were from the Canadian equivalent of the FDA, and I told them, I said, hey, this test should be covered under insurance plans, and my feeling is this is multiple hundreds of millions of dollars that can be saved in healthcare dollars. It probably in the billions worldwide, as far as that goes. Once we figure this out, and then get tested and go ahead, and so everybody will know what's going on, and especially in a one-payer system in Canada. So.
And not to mention disability, people on disability. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Dana and Dr. Schroeder. I hope this helped.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care.